Hey everyone, this is Brian Ferguson. Fans of the AWA, you are in for a real treat. My friend Joyce Poston has just released her book titled My Ringside Seat to the AWA. Joyce writes about her personal experiences with wrestlers such as Nick Bockwinkel, Lord Alfred Hayes, Baron Von Raschke, and others. Joyce also has published many photos from her collection that you will not see anywhere else. Order today by email at joyce.poston@gmail.com. Payment is through PayPal. The book is only $20 plus $6 shipping and handling. International orders, please email Joyce for shipping charge. Folks, run, don't walk to your keyboard, and order today. And enjoy the podcast. Bumps&Thumps, the talk of wrestling. I'm Brian Ferguson. First of all, I want to wish everyone a happy new year. I hope you had a great holiday season. As most of you know that are subscribers, we haven't been on for a few weeks, and that was because of the holidays. And I decided that I wanted to spend a little more time with my family, so that's what I did. So we're back today, though, and we've got our good friend, the man, the myth, the legend, the historian, the greatest, my friend, George Schire. Thanks for coming back on, George.
Hey, man. Wow. I was wondering, I had to look over my shoulder. Who you snuck in? Superstar, man of the hour. 2 weeks of the summer.
There you go.
Hey, good. I'm glad to hear that you had a good holiday, and you mentioned something after my heart. You spent time with your family. And man, I tell you what, that is what the holidays are all about. They're so busy and hectic and hustle and bustle, and you got to slow down and give a hug to the family and be appreciative for what we are blessed with.
You bet. Yeah, no. During that time, and what we're going to discuss today is my wife and I went and saw that movie, The Iron Claw, the Von Erich story.
Yep.
And I know you went and saw it as well. And,
I did.
And what we're going to talk about is, if it's good with you, we're going to talk about the good and the not so good. You know, I mean, overall, you know, we both saw it. We're going to have our opinions and, you know, do what you will with it. And George, I want to talk to you about it. Tell us a little bit about what you thought about the movie. Like, you know, what you thought was good, and if you thought anything was not so good or not accurate. I will say this: I saw my friend and your friend, James Beard. He was in it.
Yes,
he was very good, and a shout out to him. I know he was a big part of the movie as far as being a consultant and that kind of thing. So let's talk about it.
When you mentioned James Beard, let's just touch on that up front. I had a chance last July when I made a brief stop down at the George Tragos Luthez Wrestling Hall of Fame in Iowa. And of course, James was there, and he and I had a chance to talk a little bit. He is one of the greatest guys, you know, a former referee in the business. And he was, you know, he had his foot in the door, saw a lot of things, worked around a lot of the wrestlers. And of course, Dallas, Fort Worth, that was one of his territories. And I got to know James really well when he and I worked at the now ill-fated Hall of Fame in Wichita Falls, when he and I were on the nominating committee together. And so we know each other well. He's a straight guy. He's straight-laced. He's I was glad to see that he had a part. And he had told me he was going to have some parts in it when back then, you know, that Iron Claw was still on the production table. So that was good. Yes, I enjoyed seeing that. You know, Brian, I want to share this before we do anything about the Iron Claw movie. I had two people in the past 2 weeks that said to me that they were surprised that I didn't weigh in more on the movie as to the accuracy of it, and they said this to me because they know that, you know, number one, I want facts. I want things right. I want chronological history. And yes, I do. And you know this.
Yeah.
I'm a stickler on that. So, but you know, I went to the movie, and anything that I say here, folks, throughout the podcast, some of it's my opinion. Take it for what it's worth. Um, Here's the bottom line.
Did you ever wonder what could have been with the AWA had things gone differently? Had their fortunes gone differently? Had certain wrestlers not left and perhaps more money would have been at the disposal of the Gagnes? Well, wonder no further. You can go to Brad Drake's YouTube channel and experience the 1987 Supermod for yourself, as Brad Drake starts off in May 1987 along with Greg Gagne, Baron von Raschke, Vern Gagne himself, Nick Bockwinkel, Larry Zbyszko, Kurt Hennig, and a slew of others as he plays and saves the AWA.
First of all, I got a call from my neighbor. He said, "You want to go see the Iron Claw?" We went together. I didn't know what to expect. I knew it was a movie about the Von Erichs, kind of highlighting the anguish and hardship that Kevin endured being the oldest. And so I understood that going in. The thing that I did, though, is I went in with an open mind, knowing that there were a lot of non-wrestling people that were involved in the making and producing of the movie. And I also realized going in, if I was going to be fair to myself, that I had to accept the fact that sometimes they're not going to be accurate. So doing that, I really enjoyed the movie.
Yeah.
The one thing that I thought was interesting is I liked the opening scene. And for those of you that have seen it, it's kind of highlighting in black and white, which was so period perfect, of Fritz kicking the crap out of an opponent. And mind you, these are actors. All the wrestlers in here are portrayed are actors playing the part. So immediately when I saw the Fritz opening scene, I was kind of impressed. I thought they nailed Fritz pretty good, because you have to remember, well, those that don't, I saw Fritz back in the 60s when he was still in his heyday. I actually saw him as a younger kid when he was in the AWA for a coffee break, but he was a hated German, with the Iron Claw.
Yeah.
Baron von Raschke fans, I'm sorry to inform you, it was Fritz that came up with it first. So that's all the people need to know on that one. But the portrayal of Fritz, I immediately was kind of relieved, because I thought the guy playing him in the ring looked like Fritz.
Yes.
In
Yeah,
the
I
60s.
agree. Yeah.
And I was thinking back to photos that I have of him, and I said, I'm thinking, wow, this guy, they got the character right. Well, the only dismay I had was that they didn't give a little bit more of the background of Fritz in the early years, as to how really the dynasty that was going to happen was being built. But then I realized in a 2-hour film, how much can you do? So again, I had to be open-minded about that. Because sometimes the best stuff is on the cutting room floor. But, he talked in the very beginning about what he had to do to be successful. And then we kind of jumped ahead, right away to the kids, the business. And for those that were non-wrestling fans that may have seen it, which I'm going to guess there are some that never watched wrestling at all, will go see this movie.
Yeah.
And then for those that were wrestling fans, or are still today, following today's product, they weren't around during that era, so they won't pick up on anything that's inaccurate or out of sequence. That was the key thing. There were a lot of things that were out of sequence. That something happened before or after it should have, and they don't explain it. But the average person isn't going to pick up on that. So it isn't even worth. I've seen people on Facebook going, well, they did this and they should have done that. And, I don't understand what they did this for. I think you're wasting your time. It's my take is that anytime that pro wrestling can get national attention and be something that's more nostalgic than what we are offered today, because I'm not a fan, as you know. So anything that can shed some light. Did you know that, Brian? Did you know that?
I did know that. Yeah. You don't watch today's product.
I turned on NXT last night by accident.
Wow.
And totally by accident. And I swear to you, I think it couldn't have been more than 6 or 7 minutes. And I went, okay, I'm done. But anyway, we digress.
Yeah.
I don't know. They were having some sort of a battle royal with everybody killing everybody. I don't know who follows that. But anyway, the movie, if you know the Von Erich story, it really is fairly accurate. Though they left out things like in the territory down there. This just in, folks, it was a drug haven. There was no doubt in the 80s that wrestlers and wrestling fans knew that WCCW, as it became, if you wanted drugs, you went down there, whether it be the Von Erichs, the Freebirds, whoever else was in their circuit, Gino Hernandez, oh my gosh, Chris Adams, all these guys. Drugs were very much in the forefront. And it could be debated many times as to how undrugged any of them were when they were working in the ring. We'll just say that. Yeah. So they didn't touch on that, and that's good. I mean, the legitimacy of it is that it was a family that had some serious problems. And for those that don't know, they had a young boy, a young son, Jack. Fritz's real name, Jack Adkisson. And the young Jack Jr., and he was electrocuted and drowned. I don't remember how old he was, but he was pretty little.
I think he was like 5 or 6.
5 or 6, yeah.
And he got electrocuted and he fell in a snowbank.
Yes.
And drowned.
Right.
And nobody,
Yeah. I mean, it was a tragic, but this goes back, of course, you got to remember, this goes back to sometime in the 50s, very early 60s, whatever it was. Yeah. And, and that had to be very hard for the family to endure. For Fritz, Jack, and Doris, his wife. And anytime you lose a child, that pulls your heart out. Yeah. So that had to be tough. But then we had Kevin, who, was the oldest after that. And I think the thing that comes through in the movie, if anything, is that it is portrayed this way, and I think it's factual. Kevin was the one with the most sense. I think he was the oldest, and somehow he got the gene that, made him a little bit more on the right track all the time.
Mature. I'd say mature.
Yeah, mature. And as things unfolded, he started having the weight of the world on him, because the movie is good in the sense that it talks about Fritz taking over the territory, building the territory around his boys. One of the things that I thought was interesting in it was, I hear here in the AWA all the time about how Greg Gagne, the only reason he had a job was because his daddy was the promoter, and the only push he got was because his daddy was the champ, all that stuff. And, Brian, you and I have talked that, and we know from Greg too, that he had to work his butt off to earn his spot. And yes, his dad owned the promotion, but this was like any other business in the world. I mean, if you have a jewelry business and you have a son that works for you and takes over the business, or a daughter that takes over the business, that's kind of a natural progression in life. You could have a grocery store chain or whatever it is, whatever the business. The kids taking over the business, they still have to work. Come on. They still have to do things right to make the business right. So I always felt that was unfair. In the case of Fritz, by the time he got to the 80s, during the 70s, Fritz Von Erich was God in the Dallas, Fort Worth, and surrounding area. when he had bought the territory in the mid 60s and taken it over when he moved back home. He was from Texas. He was a graduate of I think South Methodist College.
I'm not sure.
I don't know if I'm getting that right, but I think that's what it was. He was a local guy, Jack Adkisson, good athlete, football player. So he was well known, well respected in Dallas, Fort Worth, and the territory surrounding that. And he would have been like the Vern Gagne of that territory, like Vern was here, or like Vince McMahon was out east, or Eddie Graham was in Florida. So he definitely, when he came back home, because a lot of people don't know, he worked in the early 50s. He was a huge heel in the Buffalo territory up in New York. And again, as the German heel, the hated German after World War II, up in Toronto, Canada, always over as that Blitzkrieg or whatever the word is. He was evil,
Yeah.
And then here in Minneapolis, he in the Minneapolis territory in the 50s, he was way over with other German wrestlers.
Omaha.
And then Omaha. And little side note there, for a coffee break, he was AWA champion in Omaha, winning it from Vern Gagne in July 7th of 1963 in Omaha. And then there was a return match, and Vern had put it on him in Omaha. They went down to Amarillo, and that's where Fritz was kind of working and headquartering at the time. And Fritz got to defend the title to Vern August 8th of 63. So it would have only been about a week period there, July 27 to, I don't know how I
Sip
remember.
Sip of coffee.
And so, but definitely it was one that they acknowledged.
Yeah, it was a world champion. Can't say
the AWA did acknowledge the change. Vern won it back. So it was done as a favor. But yeah, he had that small tenor here. The other thing that was in the movie, I thought it interesting. And this is flash forwarding a little bit, but I thought of it. There's one scene where they have Kevin on the ropes in a tag match, and they have a wrestler that's his partner kind of not tagging off to him, kind of in the show. Well, that was supposed to have been Lance Von Erich.
Okay.
And Lance was the fictional cousin that they had brought in. Ricky Vaughn, I think he wrestled as, or Ricky, I don't remember what other name he used. He was in the Pacific Northwest territory. Nicely built guy, along the lines of what Kerry Von Erich looked like. And they brought him in briefly as a cousin because after the tragedy started happening, and they felt they needed another Von Erich. I thought that was kind of a goofy thing to do at the time. And then when I saw it, they never even acknowledged it. But that's who that was supposed to have been in the ring, Lance.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. This is Brian Ferguson, the host of Bumps and Thumps, the talk of wrestling. I want to tell you about a new podcast out called Falls Count Anywhere. It is a classic pro wrestling podcast that brings you the legends of wrestling with true wrestling fans Chris DiCarlo and Charlie Turner. They bring on guests that are legends in this business, as well as wrestlers of today, promoters, referees, you name it. They have them on there, folks. And I encourage you to listen to them. If you're on YouTube, watch them. They drop every Saturday. They have their podcast. They drop it in the afternoon. So look forward to that podcast coming out. Falls Count Anywhere podcast with Chris DiCarlo and Charlie Turner. Folks, you will not be disappointed. I guarantee it. And enjoy the podcast.
So anyway, up to that point, that was my thought.
Yeah.
My biggest problem was I was looking at the way they portrayed the wrestlers, the characters, the actors, I know that the Zac Efron, I think that's how he pronounces his name. He
Efron,
was the
yeah,
one that played Kevin.
yeah.
And I actually saw an interview segment. Who was he on with? Kelly Clarkson. Does that sound right? Does she have a
That's
talk
probably
show?
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
I think it was her. I saw
yeah.
a segment where it was short. I just saw the segment where she had Zach and then the other three guys that played Carrie, David, and Chris. They were
Right.
on her show.
Mike.
And Mike, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
not Chris.
yeah.
Chris was left out completely.
Yeah, I couldn't
He was
believe it.
never
We'll
at the
talk
movie.
about that in a minute. Yeah.
Yeah,
Talk about
he was
that in a
completely
minute.
left out. But yeah, the Zac Efron, he was the only one sitting with the group on this Clarkson interview that I would have never recognized him as, because he wore a hairpiece and stuff in the movie.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
had a wig on.
And a
But
lot bigger too.
yes, and see, that was the first thing that struck me. I looked at the
Yes.
characters and I said, Kevin is bigger than the Kevin Von Erich was in the ring. Kevin was taller, wasn't as built like Carrie. And of course, we know Kevin was the barefoot one all the time.
Right.
But I thought that the Kevin character would have been better for the Carrie character in look wise.
Yes. I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
I thought they did pretty good. Well, they did pretty good with David. I thought the David character, David was the tallest of the brood.
He was.
And of course, they say again that David was the most talented or the most agile or the most adaptable to wrestling.
Right.
I only saw David. I saw him twice, and they were brief. Once I saw him in St. Louis.
Yeah.
And once I saw him in Dallas. And I couldn't say whether I thought he was superstar material or not. He was just a young kid at the time.
Yeah.
So, but he was the one they were pushing to get to the AWA title. They did squelch the rumor that, or tried to squelch the rumor that David had a drug situation in Japan, and that it was ruptured intestines or something. Yeah.
Yeah.
And, again, he met a sad ending, and that's too bad. So, the character wise, I didn't think they did as good a job, but it worked. The one that offended me the most, actually two of them, but one of them that offended me the most, that I thought, I don't know how they scripted this. And I'm going to bring this up because I had another person on Facebook say, oh, I thought this guy was the greatest at portrayal. And that's Harley Race.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
Oh,
Harley Race.
I thought the Harley Race character, the guy they had playing him, he was awful. He was awful. I sat through it and I went, I'm sitting in my chair at the theater and I'm going, really?
Yeah.
Just thinking to myself, oh my God, really?
Yeah.
He tried to capture Harley in his interview, but he didn't from the Harley Race I watched for 30 years.
Right. Yeah.
And when they got him in the ring, I mean, I know at different times Harley kind of had, sometimes he'd have a little gut on him. Harley, for the most part, never looked like this buffoon. And that bothered. And then the guy that did Ric Flair.
Oh yeah,
he couldn't have been more awful. He couldn't have been more awful.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And to me, that was so glaring.
Yeah. The race thing, I will say too, like, even, Harley had tattoos on his forearms and, nothing. He didn't have any. No. Not even, and I don't know if that was purpose. I'm sure it was, but I mean, maybe I would say
they didn't look at Harley Race close enough to know that he had tattoos.
I I'm going to give the benefit of doubt that James Beard probably told him something like, hey, you probably need to have this on there. People are going to notice. And they probably, the production crew are probably like, you know what? The guy, he's been gone and he has been out of wrestling so long, probably people won't even notice it, which is a big mistake because, especially nowadays, people are going to go back and look at pictures on the internet and say, wait a minute. I mean, I saw it, right? I even leaned over to my wife and said, hey, that's not how Harley Race looks at all. He doesn't have a gut like that. He doesn't have it, and the guy don't have any tattoos. Ric Flair, I mean, even my wife, who's not a fan, knows who Ric Flair is, and said, no. And there's other things too, but I'll let you get back to what you were talking about. It just kind of that kind of bothered me, and I'm going to bet James Beard probably said something, and on that one, on those two especially, they probably waved it off. That's my guess because I know James, he's pretty accurate on stuff, especially with Harley and those guys. Yeah.
Yep. Well, here's the thing. You just brought up a point that sometimes they figured maybe no one would notice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's an old school wrestling promoter's mindset.
Mm-hmm.
They only wanted fans to remember what they wanted them to remember.
Mm-hmm.
And, they were so good at forgetting things or eliminating things so
True.
I guess in that sense, that didn't. The thing with James Beard, I watched the credits at the end of the movie. I purposely sat through them.
Yeah.
And the only names that I recognized as far as being anywhere near around wrestling was James Beard and Chavo Guerrero Jr.
Junior. Okay.
He was listed in there. I don't recall any other person that I could pull out and say, well, that was a person that was involved at the time or around the business. So I don't know who was consulted on it. I've got to believe that here's where I say makes the movie okay. At the beginning, the very first thing they put across the screen is based on a true story. And I've told folks, I said, the key word in that sentence is based. Because once they do that, then there's creative license. They can base it on the story, but they can change the events, whatever the case may be,
Yeah.
The thing about the two characters that we're talking about, though, Race and Flair, I think that was the most glaring and disappointing to me, that they had to have somebody that could have done Flair better. He was awful. He was awful.
Wrestling fans, promoters, wrestlers, and anyone who enjoys pro wrestling now have something new to be excited about. The Wrestling Fans International Association, the WFIA, is back. WFIA is an association that exists to promote, grow, and support professional wrestling throughout the world. Membership is free. Your membership includes a free digital bi-monthly publication of the Wrestling Fan News newsletter, association updates, voting privileges, and much more. Please go to thewfia.org, that's thewfia.org, and become a member today. I will say one more character they could have probably done better was Carrie. Carrie was much more built.
Yep, absolutely.
Much and better looking than the guy that was portraying. And I know there's people out there that look like Kerry Von Erich. Maybe they couldn't find one that had the same type or that could act like Kerry as far as his demeanor and his personality. I don't know. But and no disrespect to the guys that played the characters. I mean, they did the best they could.
I applaud them.
Yeah, they did the best they could. I mean, those guys, I watched a little of that Kelly Clarkson thing, talking about what they had to do to get ready for the movie and all that. And that's a lot of work. And even if you're selected for it, that's quite an honor. So no discredit to the actors that portrayed their parts. It's just that I think the casting crew, or however you want to call them, could have done a more thorough. And I think, like you said, people forget. I mean, Carrie's been gone for 30 years. You know, Mike has been gone for 35, 36 years. Dave has been gone for almost 40 years. So I think you hit it on the head where people aren't going to remember really what they look like.
The thing that I've learned,
enough.
yeah, and that's the key thing. Like I say, some wrestling fan, like you mentioned, your wife went, she's not a wrestling fan. However, she has a little bit of osmosis coming through with you in the house.
Right.
Okay. So she may not qualify as a non-wrestling fan. She just would not be a fan, but she knows stuff because she's around.
Of me. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
and that's
true.
the same. And that's the same for Lorraine.
Yeah.
She may not pick up on this, but she picks up on some things because God knows that I live and breathe this stuff. So,
yeah.
The thing that bothers me when they do a movie that is based on a true story or they're portraying a family or a situation, and I know this is a little off topic. I've never done that before. But back in 2005,
Mhm.
the Johnny Cash movie Walk the Line came out with Joaquin Phoenix. I don't know if you ever saw the movie.
I have seen it, yeah.
Okay, Walk the Line. Well, Johnny Cash, of course, passed away in 2003.
Okay.
And his son, John Carter Cash, and others worked on putting this movie together in 2005. Overall, me being a lifelong Johnny Cash fan, I had to see this movie. And
Yeah.
I did see it. I think I saw it 13 times in the theater.
Wow.
So I guess I was addicted to it.
I guess so.
Anyway, here was the thing that bothered me when I saw it, the movie. The movie, right on the screen, they put Memphis 1955. Okay, so you know immediately that that's where you're at. Memphis 1955 in the movie. Well, then they show the street scene. This was right at the beginning of the movie. It drove me nuts. On the street scene, which I'm thinking would have been in front of the Sun Records studio, they have a 1954 Oldsmobile parked on the street. Well, that's cool. It's a 55, the 54 Oldsmobile.
Yeah.
But, and if you look at the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about. And I'm probably the only one on the planet Earth that ever noticed this. They're going to say, Shire, you need to get a life. But the 54 Oldsmobile has thin white walls on the tires. Thin. I don't know if you know the difference, but back in the 50s, the white walls,
I know they have the big,
they had the big old whites around all the, okay. Well, the problem with the thin white walls is thin white walls did not come out. They weren't even invented. They weren't even used on cars until 1962. True story.
I wouldn't have noticed that myself.
And
I'm
see,
not a
the
car
average person is never going to notice it. But to me, when I saw that, it was like, you got to be kidding me. Whoever did the back in 55 sequence, and they had 50s cars in it from 55 and back. But that one glaring error, the reason it's glaring to me is because it couldn't have been that way. They weren't invented. And people will say, well, that's so trivial, but the bottom line was, you knew that the actors in the show had to do a lot. Joaquin Phoenix, Reese Witherspoon, they had to learn to sing. They had to learn to do the songs. Whether or not they did them as perfectly as Johnny and June did, that's debatable. But doing a movie like that, it is, to me, the little things that make it the reality. So in the Fritz or the Iron Claw movie, it bothered me when they had scenes in the Iron Claw that weren't exactly right. And in the beginning, when Jack comes out of the arena and they go to the little motorhome that he's got hooked on to the Cadillac, well,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
out of sequence because that couldn't have happened with the car that they had there. They had a Cadillac. It couldn't have happened in the time frame. Nobody else is going to pick up on it.
That's why you're the historian.
Has anyone seen, I'm going to ask the fans listening when they hear this, and I'll even ask you this. Have you seen it was the Dark Side of the Ring episode, Vice, that produced the Dark
with
Side
Von Erichs?
And Kevin is prominent in there talking.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I watched that. And I'm telling you, I really thought that was a far better and more honest portrayal of the Von Erich legacy than the movie was. If you watch them back to back, you've got almost two entirely different stories.
Yeah. The one thing that really kind of disappointed me too is they cut out the youngest kid, Chris. You know, I know he really never got in the ring or anything, but they could have at least mentioned the guy.
He did do a couple little runs.
Okay, he did a couple matches, but I mean, I just feel like he got, the shaft, and maybe that's what Kevin wanted. I don't know. I just kind of felt like,
I don't know if it was
Go ahead.
I don't know if it was on the Clarkson thing or some other place I heard, but someone said that Chris, was left out, but they felt that it was one too many tragedies, because he also,
and that could be it too. Yeah. I mean, they all committed suicide except for Jack and David. I apologize. David died of
David's the mystery in this, Brian, because we don't, I still don't know to this day whether he really did have this, they showed him in the movie where he's sicker than a dog, puking. And whether or not this intestinal thing, I mean, I'm not, it's a horrible.
I remember it was called toxic shock syndrome in his intestines. That was in the 80s when he passed away, and it was in the the wrestling magazines and some articles in the paper. They said he died of toxic shock syndrome in his intestines.
Which is weird because that's what Mike had later on.
Right, when he had the shoulder surgery, and then he got an infection. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we'll never probably know what happened with David. Actually, I'm sure that's all buried somewhere, and we might not ever find out. But I just kind of wish that they would have at least. I know it was another tragedy, but the Iron Claw, I mean, it was based on tragedies, really, if you think about it. I mean, overall, I mean, it was Kevin. And I wish one more thing they would have did, George, is stated, why Kevin, didn't wear boots in the ring.
Yeah.
There's a reason for that. He forgot his boots the first time he went to a match.
Yeah.
And they said, well, you ain't got time. Get out there and do it. And that's, a key part, because I'm sure people are asking, why do you wrestle in bare feet? I mean, I would have if I didn't know. Why is he wrestling in bare feet?
Well, and it was interesting, too, because they had, I wish that they would have talked. It's like they left little pieces out. When they had Kerry getting on the motorcycle and taking off down the highway, and he was speeding, and of course we know he was a little high.
Mm-hmm.
And they show you he's coming, you can see the headlights in front of him, and then all of a sudden there's no crash, we don't see any accident. Then we see him getting out of bed on his crutches, and then when he gets to that kitchen scene where they show his foot missing, good camera graphics there, but they don't tell you, and unless you were a fan and knew that he crashed, to me that was left out. They should have showed the crash, or they should have had some sort
of, at least made the noise.
Yes.
And then he gets out of bed and he's on crutches.
If you notice, the screen actually several times will just go black for a second and then go to the next scene.
Mhm.
I noticed that. And that was what they did
Yeah.
there.
Yeah.
But to explain, and then, they tried to emphasize that, Carrie had to work hard to try to walk and put that
Yeah.
boot on and be able to maneuver and stuff. And
Mhm.
of course, we know that that's probably where the drug addiction really hit. Probably
Yeah.
truly from pain, etc., whatever, and
Yeah.
the pressure that he had to
The pressure
perform.
from his dad. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, see, they painted. I'm not sure that, and maybe I'm naive. I'm not sure that Fritz was the tyrant that they painted him out to be.
Yeah.
I think they made it sound like, and again, maybe he was,
Yeah.
Kevin, you're the guy, you're going to be the one to do it. But when Kevin didn't get the job done, okay, Carrie, you're my favorite. They actually said that, you're my favorite.
Yeah, you're my favorite.
David,
Yeah.
you're my favorite. You're going to do this. They built up a rivalry between the brothers. You saw that in there. That
Yeah.
technically they were a little bit ticked because the other one was getting the chance.
Right.
The other thing that I thought was interesting was they had Carrie win the title from Flair, which he did. And that was
Right.
the David Von Erich Memorial.
Mhm.
But
84.
they show
Yeah.
him winning it, and then all of a sudden they've got Harley Race on, and they're trying to go get the title again. They didn't tell, I'm sitting there at first, I thought, well, they never told us Carrie lost it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
those are little things, but I think if you watch the Vice, and it's on
Yeah.
YouTube, Dark Side of the
Mhm.
Ring, the Von Erichs is it Vice TV? Is that what it is?
Vice TV, Vice. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
on
But
it's on
I
YouTube too. I just watched it the other day again. It's on
I
YouTube
watched
now.
that, and I was very impressed with it.
Mhm.
I legitimately felt the sorrow that Kevin had to deal with. And that's funny because I remember when Carrie had died way back then. I made the comment, I mean, kind of to myself, but man, what is Kevin thinking? He's the last one here.
Mhm.
How do you live with that? The other thing that I thought was interesting is there was no, whether or not this is true or not, because we were never in the private lives of Fritz and Doris,
Mhm.
as husband and wife.
Right.
But they made it seem in the movie that she literally had no voice, no say, nothing to do with anything that was going on with Fritz and the boys. That Fritz ruled with an iron claw.
Yeah.
Whether or not that was true, we don't really know, because
No.
even she would say to the boys, well, your dad, you have to deal with that yourself. She didn't have anything to do with it. And you felt bad for her, because
Mhm.
we do know in real life that
Yeah.
after the final death, that Doris and Fritz split up, and she
Yeah.
left him. So there
Yeah.
had to be maybe it was just
Yeah.
too much for her to deal with the tragedies. But they don't say that in the movie, but at the very end,
Right.
you'll see that Fritz comes into I think it's like the dining room area, and he asks where supper is. And Doris said she's not making it and she's painting.
Painting.
Well, you can see that was the split.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
but Fritz, as a promoter, they don't expel on this. Um, but he was really one of the more respected promoters in that
Mhm.
era. With,
Mhm.
you had Gagne, you had Watts, you had Roy Shire, you had Don Owen, Muchnick, and Eddie Graham. And then
Mhm.
and lo and behold, you throw McMahon in there too, Daddy McMahon.
But
Um,
yeah, Vince
of
Cena,
that
yeah.
era, Fritz was in that group that, these were territories that were good. They paid well.
Mhm.
The other thing I thought was interesting, and this is a noted error, but I think only I would pick up on it. They say that the Von Erichs are going to go against Bruiser Brody and Gino Hernandez.
Yeah, in the
And
beginning. Yeah, that's right. I
in the
remember that.
beginning,
Yeah.
and I thought that was interesting because Brody was never an adversary to the Von Erichs. He was on their side. it was one of the few territories that he was a baby face.
Okay.
I better say face in case some people think I'm. But yeah, and then what about the Brody character in the movie? The guy was a midget compared to Frank Brody, Frank
Yeah,
Goodrich. I
he
don't think
was.
he looked like Brody
Uh,
at all.
all those guys. The only one that, and Zach Efron playing Kevin, he was way too big for playing
Way too
Kevin.
big. Yeah.
And I thought Kerry Von Erich was should have been taller than Kevin, at least a little bit, and
Mhm.
more built.
Well,
But
Kevin was the best built of the whole group.
Kevin was, but I mean, Kerry had a more, how do you want to say? I don't want to say bodybuilder, but I mean, he was, I can't explain it, but Kevin,
was
yes,
just,
overall athlete, physique wise,
yeah,
yes, because he had the ripped abs,
yeah,
very lean. Kerry was more, he was bigger, but bulkier. What I'm trying to
yeah,
say, I guess, in his
yeah,
arms and his chest.
yeah,
David, I think the guy that played David did a good job because David was pretty normal looking
yeah,
athlete as far as
yeah.
but he was tall, but he didn't have all the ripped abs and the big muscles. He was just a very strong guy and tall. And Mike, the guy that played Mike, yes, Mike was lanky. He was, I mean, bigger guy, but I mean, I thought that guy did okay playing Mike too. I mean, like you said, overall it was a good movie.
I think it was.
I
I
mean, if
really,
you're not a wrestling person like you and I, you're more of it than I am, obviously. But I think you would enjoy the movie. There's a few things missing, but I mean, I thought they did overall a pretty good job. Other than the few
well,
things.
overall, and then I went back. I told you I saw it with my neighbor, and
Yep,
then a week ago or so, in fact, it was last Wednesday. We're taping this on a Wednesday.
we
Last
are.
Wednesday, I went with Lorraine. I said, do you want to go over? And we went over. And I wanted to see it again because, with any movie or any show, you watch it the
Mm-hmm.
second time, you pick out a couple different things that you didn't notice
Mm-hmm.
the first time. So I
Yeah,
enjoyed doing that. And that
yeah,
was when I picked out the little things like uh, the Lance Von Erich thing. And,
yeah,
I didn't catch those. Overall, I tell folks, support the movie.
yeah.
Anything that we can do to keep old school wrestling alive, I
Mm-hmm.
think that's good.
Yeah,
Whether or not history is portrayed exact in it, again, based.
yeah,
Get
and
that key word in there.
yeah, and I'm honestly, George, I think part of it might have been okay. There's so much history with the Von Erichs too. It was a 2 hour plus movie.
Mm-hmm.
They probably had to condense it down, and they might have filmed all that stuff and like had to make cuts because okay, it probably was a 4 hour film originally, and people aren't going to stay for
Trust
4
me,
hours.
it's that way with movies and books all the time. Stuff is
Right. So
left on the floor.
you gotta condense it down
Yeah, yeah,
to 2 hours, and so some of those cuts, I mean, but like you said, overall, I thought it was a good movie. Uh, James Beard, a good friend of ours, I thought he did great in it, and as consulting as a referee, I mean, I was watching for him because I knew he was
yeah,
in it. I'd be
yeah,
watching for him, and I'd see him a few times. I went over to my wife. Hey, that's James Beard right there. Honey, remember him?
yeah.
Because she met him in Las
I
Vegas.
did that with my neighbor.
I was like,
There
that
he
is
is.
James Beard. There he is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, my opinion, overall, great movie.
One of the things that, from a nostalgic standpoint, that I actually went, wow, because I had one of those flashback moments when they
Mhm.
showed the scene of the sportatorium, and
Yeah.
they're going for the night's matches. The sportatorium, Brian. One of the things that I loved about old school wrestling is the smaller arenas that we had. We
Mhm.
didn't have these 30,000 seat arenas like we have today.
Right.
We had a 10,000 seat, maybe max auditorium
Yep.
in most cities. And if you had a 10,000 crowd for wrestling, it was a sellout, baby.
Yeah.
But normally they were smaller venues. And what a lot of people don't realize, excuse me, is the sportatorium in Dallas is legendary.
Mhm.
You know, when I can hear Bill Mercer talking about the world famous sportatorium, I can hear my buddy Boyd Pierce, who used to be their TV guy back in
Yeah.
the 60s and into the very early,
Boyd
well,
Pierce,
into the
yeah.
70s. And Boyd, you know, talking about the sportatorium. And then I had the opportunity to actually be in the sportatorium for wrestling.
Oh, wow.
And it was a wrestling venue um, that was like few others. It just had wrestling written on it.
Yeah.
So it pretty much was exclusive for Tuesday night wrestling. It was originally it was owned by the promoter Ed McElmore or McLemore or whatever, however pronounced his name. He actually owned the building, and
Okay.
then they had some other things. Yeah, there's actually a sign if you look at the movie real close up in the corner. It's got the Dallas wrestling and everything advertised, but then they got, I can't remember what it is. It was the other thing that they have there, like dancing or something. But
Okay. Yeah.
what a unique place for wrestling. And
Yeah.
it was like a pit. The ring was down in the center and you walked in.
Yeah.
It was an old tin building.
Yeah.
You know, in the summertime
Yeah.
it had to be 150 degrees in there because they didn't have
Yeah.
air conditioning
Air
in those
conditioning.
days.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had a moment, and that was a real picture of the sportatorium. That
Yeah.
looked cool.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. You know, like I said, I'm glad we did this today. I enjoyed the movie overall. I mean,
I did too.
I don't mean to be nitpicky about it, and don't take it the wrong way, fans. I mean, overall, great movie. If you're a fan, go out and see it. It's
Go out and
worth.
see it
It's worth.
twice.
Yeah, it's worth it. It really is. It's a great story, and I want to thank you, George, my friend, for coming on today and doing this with me. Always a pleasure.
It
Always.
is. It is. Always fun.
All right. So on that note, folks, if you're watching, thank you. If you're listening, thank you. And if you haven't subscribed, please do so. One more time, Mr. George Schire. Thank you, my friend. And Happy New Year to everyone. And we will talk to you soon.